game then if you can't produce what these
Oh,
two
see, hers
do.
isn't plugged in either.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean.
So everybody's starting to get jumpy and take risks that they shouldn't be taking, but, you know, I'll just call him up and give him a number.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna call to order the
Right, yeah.
Regional Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, May 9th, and we're gonna start with roll call.
Diane Vanderwell,
Here.
Peter Gower,
Here.
James Barnes,
Here.
Larry Chesney,
Here.
Sarah Trevilicek,
Here.
James Fewens,
Here.
Ed Hawkins,
Here.
Frank Peterson, and Kevin Weisky.
Here.
Great. We'll move along to the agenda. Are there any changes? Oh, I apologize. Sorry. Commissioner Trevilicek, will you please do it? Sorry, I checked it off.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now we'll move along to the agenda.
Move to
So-
approve.
Second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we'll move along to the approval of the minutes for March 14th, 2018.
So moved, Commissioner Weisky.
Second, Commissioner Chesney.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Next, we'll move along to the March 26th RPC meeting.
Move to approve.
Second.
Commissioner Chesney, second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries. Next, we'll move along to public comment. This is anything?
Yeah, we have 3 this evening. We have Stephen Wolgast, and after that will be Danny Cleus.
Terrific, thank you.
Hi, good evening, it's Steve Wolgast, 5220 Cedarwood Drive, Reno. It looks to me like the commission has a full plate. Just yesterday, Commissioner Jung is considering whether we should have an ordinance to prevent development in the closed basins, and she's looking for guidance from the regional commission. Along with her, Commissioner Lucy also wants help resolving traffic issues on Mount Rose Highway following a tragic fatality that just happened day before yesterday. And while he says that the county is responsible for allowing the development along Mount Rose Highway, the highway itself is the state's responsibility. But again, he's hoping that he can get some guidance from the regional authority to move forward. I've spoken to the RFD Reno Fire Department and Truckee Meadows Fire Department. They could be better coordinated, but they can't do it based on the way their funding is structured, and they would also welcome some oversight from the region. The regional coordination is really the only, Story County has the Trick Industrial Center, bringing large companies with many employees, which is really at the root of our housing crisis and our homelessness crisis. And if you look at other big cities, they also identify big corporations with big increases in employment as kind of at the root of that. That, again, is really a regional problem. Regional coordination is really the only answer. We don't want it forced on us, as was considered at the state level back in 1989. Now, you're in luck, because I've met with your planning staff, and I've been impressed by their capability and grasp of complex issues. So I'm hopeful that you have the will and the vision to move forward, because there's a lot that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
And this is Danny Cleus.
Thank you.
And then after that will be Tammy Hildstill.
Danny Cleus for the record. As everybody knows, I'm up here a lot with the city and the county. But like like Mr. Steve Walgass said, the county commissioners are changing their tune now. Everything that we see going on out there in the North Valleys needs to change. That lake is still full. Something needs to be done with it. Right now, they're building a big old sluice for a direct flow right to that lake. It's at least 4 times bigger than what the original one was, which it needed to be done because when that goes over, it floods everybody. But now they're making it so it's a direct sluice right to the lake. So who does that affect? Affects us residents around that lake. Like Steve said, the county is asking for your guys' input and your other regional commissioners' input. It needs to stop until something is done with that lake. Hopefully you guys can tell them, direct them, because it's almost 1.5 years now that lake's been full. Next month comes 1.5 years. Where in the United States do you know that you're under 24-hour flood watch for 1.5 years? And I say this because in my area, we have to rely on pumps. If those pumps don't work, we go under. It's not fair. So hopefully with you guys can influence everybody else and tell them to quit. It's not fair to me to line your guys' pockets with the developer's money and say, go ahead, we don't care. Because the residents that have been out there 40+ years should matter the most. We were there way before any of this stuff ever happened. Thank you.
Thank you. Tammy Holt Still for the record. There's what Danny was talking about as soon as it comes up. It's 6 wide. Why does the city of Reno need something that wide to hold that much water in the front of the valley? Unless there's a whole bunch of building that's going to happen and you're expecting a whole bunch of stormwater runoff. That is scary. And when you ask the city of Reno about it, they know nothing. They do not say anything, and we already know what Amazon looked like. So on to the other things to be talked about. This right here is a list that a resident put together. Some of them are now off, but most of them are still there. There is a lot of building that is happening in the North Valleys that has been already set up to go. This doesn't include the rest of it. What is happening to this county needs to come to a halt, and regional needs to be responsible for every single development coming through there. How can regional not know what all the small ones are to make sure that the proper housing is put in place if regional is not involved with the 206 homes or 619 homes? It doesn't make any sense. You're a regional. You should all be working together. With that in mind, as I was preparing for a judicial review, I found this in the NRS. Number 4, due to the fact of the way that the statute is set up and regional is now the mothership and then everybody else falls underneath, this is very important and it should be followed. We know that the health and the welfare of Lemon Valley has not been done, not for 1.5 years. Sitting with HESCO barriers that can break down at any time, people hit them, destroy them. There's even been county trucks that are raking across them now when they're trying to go around a curve too fast before the first bump at Palace. Won't be long and those HESCO barriers are not going to be able to hold the water back. Too much affluent water, too much development. Development equals storm runoff, development equals affluent water. You pump it in, you're gonna have to pump it out. Otherwise, you have an imbalance, and then you have Tumwa injecting into the aquifer that was told back in 1996 by USGS not to do. Come on, guys. It's time to cut it. It's time to start over. It's time to reevaluate and go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other requests to speak?
Yeah, we have one more, Michael Welling.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Regional, for allowing me to speak tonight. Come to you tonight about water issues. And they're not the water issues that we talk about with standing water and that. The water issue that I'm most concerned about, along with the affluent, is the idea of what we're gonna do with development in the North Valleys between the city and the county. What's happening is that things get discussed in city meetings that don't make it to county meetings with regards to the water. This just happened at city last week when they had a agenda item change and they had a water conversation about it. I'd like to see those items also be on the county agendas and on the regional agendas when we're talking about what we're gonna do with water that's sewage that's coming from the county into the city plant, along with the water that's coming from the city into that city plant. And they're talking about expansion. They're talking about pumping water to Sparks, which includes all three areas around here, which means it's a regional issue. It's no longer just a city and a county issue. I'm asking you guys to get together on this and talk about it. When we're talking about pumping water to Long Valley Creek, talking about pumping water into Honey Lake Valley, and we're talking about pumping water into Sparks, we got some problems that we need to really take a hard look at. Along with that, nobody said that they've talked to anybody in California about pumping water across the state line and whether or not they're aware of it. I think that's a huge issue. The other thing is I live in the Red Rock area. We have a couple of projects there that at some point are probably gonna wanna hook into the city thing. I think because of the two agencies, the city and the county together, I think it's important that regional is involved in what's taking place and continues to be involved in this. Again, the moratorium word has come up again in things, and I support that there's a moratorium on some of this building, if not for a long, long time, at least for an interim until we get some direction as to where we're going. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And can you please state your name for the record? Because I don't know that you did it at the beginning. I apologize.
Michael Welling.
Thank you. Any other requests to speak? Terrific, thank you. Next, we'll move on to business of the day. Or I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Next, we'll move on to the consent agenda. So I just need a motion, please. Move to approve the consent item.
Madam Chair, I'll second. Commissioner Gower?
Okay, I have a first and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, motion carries. Next, we'll move along to business of the day. Public hearing, Regional Plan Amendment, RPA 18-001. Consideration of RPC Resolution 1801.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. For the record, Nate Kusha, Regional Planning. This agenda item discusses the Dodge Flat Regional Plan Amendment and can be found starting on page 105 of your packet. So this request is a mapping amendment to maps 9 through 11 of the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan, adding a new regional utility site and new regional utility corridor in the East Truckee River Canyon at 2505 State Route 447. Overhead is a map showing the general location of the project site. And now overhead is a map of the project site. This map shows the existing utility corridor that crosses the project site in purple, as well as the proposed utilities site and proposed utility corridor, shown in orange and blue respectively. As you can see, the proposed corridor will connect with the existing transmission line that's already there. Material submitted indicates that the creation of a new utility site and new corridor will serve as a, will serve a new solar energy project for the generation of renewable energy. So, regional planning staff recommends that the RPC consider the regional plan amendment as described in the staff report and adopt RPC Resolution 18-01, which is attachment 2 to your staff report as well, and recommending adoption to the Regional Planning Governing Board. A recommended motion is overhead, and I'm available to answer any questions on this. Yeah.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any questions? Okay, this is a public hearing, so I'm going to open the public hearing. Do we have any requests to speak?
I have none at this time.
Okay, thank you. I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commissioners. Commissioner Chesney.
I'd like to make a motion.
Well, I'll let you make a motion.
Well, then I'm going to do it. I move to approve RPC Resolution 18-01, recommending to the RPGB adoption of the Regional Plan Amendment to maps 9 through 11 of the 2012 Regional Plan as detailed in the staff report. Commissioner Gower, I'll second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Next, we'll move along to public hearing, Regional Plan Conformance Review, Project of Regional Significance, Dodge Flat Solar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, again, Nate Kusha, Regional Planning. This agenda item discusses Dodge Flat Solar Project of Regional Significance and can be found starting on page 113 of your packet. So this item is for the request to construct a new solar energy substation, ancillary facilities, including 2 private communication antennas, and to connect the project to an existing transmission line in the East Truckee Meadows, or East Truckee River Canyon. Overhead is a map showing the project location, and the area already contains a high concentration of utility corridors and sites, which is compatible with the proposed project. Again, overhead is the map showing the existing utility corridor, as well as the proposed utility site and corridor. As you can see, there is a small portion of the project site that is development constraint area in the northwest section. However, this portion of the project is not anticipated to be developed. And after reviewing the documentation that has been submitted by the Washoe County, regional planning staff concludes that the proposed project of regional significance conforms with the goals and policies of the 2012 regional plan. The recommended motion is overhead. I'm available to answer any questions. We also have Washoe County planning staff and John Burkage and the folks from Dodge Flat available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any questions? Okay, this is a public hearing, so I'll open the public hearing. Do we have any requests to speak?
I have none at this time.
Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Bring it back to the commission.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner
I'd
Chesney,
like to propose a motion.
I'll let you.
I move to find the Dodge Flat Solar Project of regional significance in conformance with the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan based on the findings listed in the staff report.
Commissioner Weisky, I'll second it.
Great, I have a first and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Next, we'll move along to Regional Plan Conformance Review, City of Sparks, for the Quarry CR 18-005.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to,
Make sure you're on.
Yeah.
There you go.
thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask the indulgence of the commission this evening. This is Chris Tolley's project, however, he is home ill, and I will be taking this over this evening with the assistance of Karen Melby from the City of Sparks, so I'm sure any mistakes are my own, and as I said, I appreciate your forbearance. So good evening. According to this slide, I'm Chris Tolley, but I'm not. I'm actually Kim Robinson from TMRPA. This is a regional plan conformance review and project of regional significance and a comprehensive plan amendment at 555 Highland Ranch Parkway. And pages 2, 3, or slides 2, 3, 4, and 5, I believe Karen's going to join us for that in terms of the technical conversation. And once again, I appreciate your assistance, Karen.
Good evening, I'm Karen Melby, Development Service Manager for the City of Sparks. This request is, as she stated, for a development agreement and annexation. This is what's being reviewed by City of Sparks. Also, a comprehensive plan amendment and a zone change. Before you tonight is the conformance review and the project regional significance. This project is 386 acres. On this slide, you can see it shows the existing acreage breakdown by the land use, the percentages, and then the proposed acreage. One of the things I would like to point out is you can see that they have, on our existing land use map, they have 297.9 acres, and they're proposing 0. That is because with our development agreement, we are requiring that they have a minimum of 100 acres, but we did not want to put a commitment on the open space on the map until we have a defined area with their slope analysis of what really would be the open space, because we don't want to have to come back before you and amend when they find out when the open space is. We don't want to have to come back and amend our comprehensive plan. So what we've done is committed to an acreage. They are looking at 225 probably in that ballpark, but we don't want to put the land use designation on our map until, we won't be putting it on a map. It's in our development agreement. Let's see, which way do I push?
Okay, there we got it.
In the development agreement, they are committing to 1,200 to 1,800 residential units. This slide showing the project of regional significance. They are actually triggering 3 of the criteria. They are exceeding the 625 threshold by, as I said, 1,200 to 1,800 units. They are permitted to single-family detached or attached units. With commercial uses, they're proposing about 13 acres of commercial. The gross density will be a minimum of 3.1 to a maximum of 4.6 dwelling units. The other triggers are the sewer disposal and then also average daily trips. You can see the numbers on the screen that they're exceeding. This is the area. It's essentially northwest corner of Pyramid Highway and Highland Ranch. This property was formerly a quarry, hence the name, the quarry. And as I said, it's 386 acres. This shows the area is in the Sparks TMSA area. There is an existing road into the property, and most of the development is proposed within the old quarry area. I don't know what slide I'm at.
Thank you, Ms. Melby. We appreciate your assistance. And please stick around if there are any technical issues, but thank you again for your indulgence. As you can see, we've identified development constrained areas on the map above you, and what you're really identifying, what you're really seeing is slopes of 30% or greater. The housing is proposed on the balance of the parcel that does not have those incredibly high slopes. Right now, this is an example of the existing land use. That's an aerial. At the moment, the existing land use, as Karen mentioned, is both an employment center and open space with a tiny little bit of commercial. We're looking to move towards proposed intermediate density residential, again, a small portion of commercial, and again, you see an aerial of the site up above. In terms of review criteria for the regional plan, Policy 4.1.3 of the regional plan identifies 6 factors that the RPC must take into consideration when they're talking about items such as this, including regional form and pattern, infill housing and jobs housing balance, public services and infrastructure, development constraints, military installations, and cumulative and indirect effects. We can identify, actually, let me back up and say that, actually, I take that back. Let me do this. Per the regional plan, the proposed use is allowed in Sparks's Truckee Meadows service area. A corresponding development agreement requiring incorporation into Sparks's impact fee service area number 1 will allow staff to address concurrency with the development of the site by contributing to the cost of necessary public services and facilities. Portion of the amendment site is considered development constrained, as we discussed. Slope analysis is required to define the developable area before any development can go on the site. In relation to the goals and policies of the regional plan, staff has not identified any significant conformance issues with the proposed project and does recommend approval of this particular project based on the factors listed in policy 4.1.3. And I think I missed something. Sorry about that. These facilities and services listed above, including sanitary, sewer, water, flood, police and fire, traffic, and parks. The development agreement addresses all of these subject areas through either requiring specific infrastructure improvements or generally through the inclusion of the property into the impact fee service area 1. Therefore, we are recommending approval of this particular item. You can find a suggested motion above on your screen, and this concludes staff's presentation, and we have a variety of folks available if there are any questions.
Terrific, thank you. With that, do any of the commissioners have any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
A couple of us. yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Curley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure that I'm understanding this. I'm looking at this amendment overview, and I think Commissioner Weiske's we're kind of perplexed here. We're seeing that the total project is 386.8 acres, and that there might be, that the open space would be 225 acres. And then we're seeing, then I'm seeing a threshold for homes of 3 to 1 or 4 to 6 dwelling units per, I'm just trying to understand the math.
Absolutely. Can we ask, oh, there we go, Armando?
Because it's not adding up for me.
Okay, sure.
Good evening, I'm Armando Ornelas. I'm the Assistant Community Services Director for the City of Sparks. So in terms of the land use comparison, if we could start there. Essentially, currently, you have a split between open space, employment center, commercial. And what the proposal is to shift that to just 2 categories, which would be commercial and intermediate density residential. So there would not be anything on the land use map that is actually designated as open space. And instead, the development agreement would essentially provide for that because it limits the total area to be developed to 225 acres. And then also has an additional requirement that requires a minimum of 100 acres of open space. So in fact, the 225 acres equates to about 58% of the site, a little over 58% of the site. So that doesn't mean that all of it would, strictly speaking, be open space, but it would be it wouldn't be developed for other purposes. Some of that, a minimum of 100 acres, would be open space.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kim, I'm trying to get my hands around how staff recommends approval for this when we're, I'm based upon regional planning's policies of taking away over 50% of the existing open space acreage and not even designating when you bring something before us. We don't know exactly how many acres it's going to be. It could be 100 acres of the original 297. So that's a third of what is there. How does that equate with our policies to make the findings?
I think that's a great question. Just to be clear, the development agreement actually identifies that 100 acres must be reserved. So we do know that it would be 100 acres, and you're correct, that is a third of the open space that exists there currently. In terms of identifying whether or not to approve this particular project, I think that we have a plan that we've had for a while, and that we've seen a variety of different projects come through. And that this project is identified to provide additional housing in an area that is available, that has infrastructure that can be available and will be paid for appropriately, and does confirm that there will be open space reserved. So the conversation, and I think it's a really good one, and I think it's one that we need to have during the regional plan update as we move forward, is what is the right balance around preservation of open space in terms of what we have as open space today compared to accommodating growth in the future. I was going to mention a little bit later that we are suggesting a workshop with Echo Northwest on June 13th, and this is one of the conversations that we would be suggesting that we have at that time.
Okay, so again, to go back to current policy today, how does our current policy suggest we consider the removal of open space?
Sure.
Especially at 66%.
Sure. And if we look at the items that must be approved in terms of regional or in terms of conformance, excuse me for just one second. If I look at the factors in policy 4.1.3, regional form and pattern is definitely one of them. Infill housing, jobs, housing balance, public services and infrastructure, development constraints, military installations, and cumulative and indirect effects. Open space is not specifically identified in these 6 policies. Again, I think that's actually something that needs to be addressed more completely as part of our regional plan update, because I think this has been an issue consistently during the time that we've had this version of the plan.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Gower.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at the staff report, and it's showing 30% of the site as DCA for slopes over 30%, or excuse me, slopes over 30%, 116 acres. So is the 100 acres in addition to the 116 acres, or is that part of the 116 acres? Can you talk to me, either Kim or Armando, about how those two numbers jive?
They're overlapping, so again, for the record, Armando Ornelas, Assistant Community Services for the City of Sparks. They're overlapping, so that 116 acres, or that 100 acres would count towards that 100, I'm sorry, let me put it this way. The development constrained area will almost certainly be part of the, what ends up being designated as open space and dedicated through the subdivision map process.
So I guess why go through the process of having 100 acres set aside through that agreement if you already have a policy that requires that almost 117 acres have to be open space by regional policy?
Belts and suspenders.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what was that?
It takes it a step further. So essentially, in addition to the fact that our comprehensive plan policy, calls for the protection of development constrained areas, and that is codified in our zoning code. So you have those protections, if you will. This adds another layer, if you will, of protection by requiring a minimum of 100 acres of open space. The development agreement also sort of bookends it on the other end by saying that a maximum of 225 acres of the site can be developed. So in reality, almost certainly the amount of open space will exceed the 100 acres. It'll almost certainly exceed the 116 acres that's development constrained by virtue of these overlapping protections for the site, if you will.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hawkins, and then I'll get you Commissioner Chesney.
Thank you, Madam
Oh,
Chair.
you- raise your hand.
So let me see if I have this right. We've got a lot of open space that's been put into limbo until somebody figures out we're over 30% in height, or 30%, or 4-to-1, or whatever you want to call the ratio. What did we start out as open space before we get to this point? Was it significant more than 100 acres?
It was per the staff report, table 1. The current portion of the site that has that open space designation is 297 acres.
So we've got most of the whole place is open space, but we're moving that over, and maybe we'll get 100 acres of open space. How do you obliterate the zoning and pick and choose? Well, that's got 30% slope or more, so that's got to be open space because we can't build on it. And where's the justification here? I mean, you're taking the open space away and making it buildable space.
So this is private property. It is within the TMSA. So it is available for development in general terms. Practically speaking, the way the process will lay out, there is in the application, there is a preliminary land use plan, which is binding in terms of the development agreement. So substantive changes from that would require potentially amending the development agreement, but it'll go through the process of moving to a more detailed slope analysis that'll further define, what portions of the site are most appropriately developed. And then in essence, the areas that remain will be what gets designated as open space.
Now, is that going to be deed restricted open space so it can never be touched again?
Excuse me, Mr. Ornelas. Commissioner Hawkins?
Yes.
So you understand, this is not public open space, this is private open space.
Understand that.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that's put out there, that it is private.
Understand.
Mr. Ornelas?
And there is language in the development agreement that addresses that. And if you'll give me a couple of seconds, I will find it. But essentially, it says that if Section 3.3B of the development agreement, which is on page 10 of that agreement, it includes the language that reads as follows: limits the total area of the property to be cleared, graded, or otherwise disturbed to 225 acres. With a recordation of each final subdivision map, the master developer shall convey the lands designated as open space to the entity responsible for maintenance of the lands designated as open space. So, as Commissioner Vanderwell has indicated, this is not public open space, it's private open space. We would anticipate that most likely the entity that would be required for the maintenance of those lands is going to be the HOA.
Correct me if I'm wrong, we have a private property and we have stuff that would be considered government, the BLM, all that, okay? There's only two types of property that I'm looking at here. Privately owned property, which somebody has to govern the code on, or the zoning on, and it doesn't look like it's happening here. That's where I'm coming from. We're taking all this open space and playing with it until we can't use it anymore, and we say it's private. Well, hell, my property's private too, but I still have codes and stuff that's gonna be enforced on my property, regardless if I have a house on it or not. You have 300 acres, and yeah, it's private, but you're still governed by the codes. You see what I'm saying? It's unless it belongs to BLM or the forestry, I mean, the rest of us, we're all private owners.
If I may, Commissioner, that's correct. This is private land, and it will be governed in terms of its development by the Sparks Municipal Code.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ornelas. Any other questions? Okay, this is a public hearing. I'll open the public hearing. Do we have any requests to speak? Okay, with that, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. I'll entertain a motion, discussion. Commissioner Fewens?
I'm prepared to
Okay,
and get turned on here. There we go.
thank you.
So, whoa, now we're hot. Say, Commissioner Fewens, I'm prepared to make a motion. I move to find the query amendment to the Sparks Comprehensive Plan in conformance with the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan based on the findings listed in the staff report. And I move to find the query project of regional significance in conformance with the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan based on the findings listed in the staff report.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Any discussion?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Weisky?
thank you. until Sparks staff described the open space as being private property and being controlled through development at the end of development as being private, I see it as becoming an HOA responsibility to maintain it and to control it. It's been done in both the county and the city of Reno also. Great satisfaction 9 out of 10 times. So I will now be able to make the findings, but I also want to say that I still, because we are not privy to what staff receives as far as whatever the planning agreement is that the city of Sparks has with the landowner or developer, we don't know that. And in my opinion, what is being asked of us, asked of me tonight to vote on is a blank check to the city of Sparks to complete a negotiation and to complete a build-out with a blank check. I mean, we're giving them the okay today, and they're going to figure out all the details tomorrow. And I believe that is backwards to the way this system is supposed to work. And if we're supposed to be doing things in a way to create more respect for the regional planning process, things like that need to stop. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Weisky. Any other comments from the commissioners? Okay, with that, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I oppose.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Next, we move along for a presentation update regarding the Truckee Meadows Regional Affordable Housing Strategy efforts from the Enterprise Community Partners.
Good evening. Chris Kizzy, Enterprise Community Partners, Project Manager for the Regional Strategy for Affordable Housing in partnership with TMRPA and TMHC. Thank you.
Can you speak up?
Sure.
Thanks.
Sorry, did you guys catch the first part? Happy to kind of give you guys an update on where we are with the Regional Strategy for Housing Affordability. Have been coming out to the Truckee Meadows region for several months now, meeting with various stakeholders, implementing a lot of the project components that are necessary to get this project off the ground. And so happy to kind of give you guys an update on that, as well as preview some of the trends and conditions we're seeing in the Truckee Meadows region, and also outline some of the next steps that we're seeing. So we'll go through first with an overview of the project and the approach. I think that'll ground the Planning Commission in this effort. Also talk about why a regional housing strategy. I think that's an important question to ask, given the context and some of the conditions we're seeing. Also provide a snapshot of the regional housing trends and some of the potential tools that we've been discussing throughout this process that could be brought to bear in the Truckee Meadows regions, and then open it up for conversation and discussion. So in terms of overview approach, this is a 3-phase project. This is a similar approach that we take in communities throughout the country, where we want to, in phase 1, really understand what are the conditions, what are the needs, what are the challenges related to affordable housing in the Truckee Meadows region. And then a second component to that is really understanding what is the structure that's necessary to drive this process moving forward. So phase 1 is kind of 2 components. One, understanding the needs through data analysis and stakeholder conversations and interviews, as well as implementing and establishing a planning structure that's informed by the community, informed by various stakeholders, to really drive and move this process, so that as we get to those policy conversations, those strategy discussions, that they're being weighed by the key stakeholders in the region. And so that's something that we've been continuing through phase 1. Phase 1 is going to end roughly about June. And at the end of phase 1, we'll have a community profile that really outlines all the needs and challenges that exist in the region related to affordable housing, as well as some of the existing policies that are present in the region, and some of those gaps where additional policies could be used, additional funding could be leveraged, and we'll identify all those opportunities through the community profile. Phase 2 is where we begin to align some of the strategies we've been talking about through the planning structure, some of the policy decisions that we've been vetting with that structure as well, and integrate that with the housing needs and conditions that we're seeing within the region. So that way we have some alignment between the conditions on the ground, the policies and strategies that are going to help alleviate and address some of those conditions. Phase 3 is really about codifying all those things into a formal housing strategy. So phase 2 will end roughly August, September. Phase 3 will pick up and we'll have a finished final plan around November 2018. So one of the conversations we had early on was really about how are we defining affordable housing within the region? And so we've had conversations with various stakeholders, and there's really 3 key terms that often get tossed out when we talk about affordable housing. And these are kind of three terms that you see on the slide here: affordable housing, public housing, and workforce housing. From our perspective and from our conversation with various stakeholders, when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about all 3 of these things. So that's from those at the lower end of the income spectrum to those up to 120% AMI. Those are the folks, and this will become clear on the next slide, that need affordable housing in the Truckee Meadows regions, that are experiencing housing challenges today within the region, and will continue to see housing challenges within the region until we can develop the strategies and policies to really effectively address that. And so in looking about who benefits from affordable housing, who needs affordable housing in the region today, it's the workforce that exists in the region. So it's your gaming dealers, your receptionists, your construction workers, your elementary school teachers, your police patrol officers. These are the folks that benefit from affordable housing today, as well as the entire community benefits from affordable housing. And so when we talk about affordable housing, this is who it serves. These are the families and households that need it and benefit from it, and these folks all serve the community today. One of the things we're really excited about at Enterprise and bringing to the Truckee Meadows regions is our Opportunity 360 platform. If you look across the country, a lot of housing plans and strategies are developed looking just at housing market conditions without other factors that families and households make decisions about every day, and that's where to locate housing that is affordable. And so at Enterprise, we look at a cross-sector of factors that includes housing stability, education. Is the housing being located next to good schools? Is it transit accessible? Is it providing access to job centers? So all these factors weigh into those decisions. And so when we make housing investments in the community, we need to make sure we're investing relative to the entire comprehensive overview of what's happening in the community, and that's the perspective we want to bring through this planning process. And just to provide some examples of how we used this before, in Prince George's County, which is a large urban county outside of Washington, D.C., we recognized that they had a very unique character to the county. And so that was a rural character, a suburban character, and an urban character. And they wanted to understand access to opportunity relative to those 3 tiers. And so we were able to use Opportunity 360 to illustrate how various neighborhoods are similar within those 3 tiers, and then design housing strategies that address some of the challenges that are evident in those 3 tiers. And so it's a really effective way of, one, preserving the character of the county, but also tailoring our housing strategies to meet that unique character. In the city of Denver, we just finished a 5-year housing strategy for the city of Denver, and they really wanted to understand where are their existing assets, how do neighborhood conditions help leverage those assets today, and how can they make better connections between their housing decisions and their jobs and health decisions as well. And so we were able to kind of illustrate how we can use this to understand that alignment and develop better housing strategies for them. And the last example is we just wrapped up a housing plan, a 10-year housing plan for the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, where we're using the framework to really develop strategies that expand access to opportunity where it doesn't exist today, and build access to opportunity through better leveraged housing investments. And so we were able to identify where those access to opportunity is weaker in the city, as well as where it's a little stronger, and then tailor our strategies to effectuate change there. So our approach to this project is we recognize that we're not going to be able to tackle all the housing challenges that exist in the region from day one. And so we're really synchronizing and tailoring the housing strategies that are going to be presented in the plan to first build the capacity of the region to address those challenges in the short term. So expanding the toolbox, if you will, both from a policy perspective and from a financing perspective, to allow the region to actually address these challenges over time. And so we're working with the planning structure that we're implementing to identify what are those short-term actions what are the medium-term actions, and what are those longer-term actions that might take a little longer to address, whether it's policy-related or funding-related. But in the meantime, we're building the capacity of the region over this 10-year period to implement this plan over the long term. Just quick highlights of some of our accomplishments to date. As I mentioned, we established a planning structure that's really going to drive this process, and so we have an executive leadership team that consists of representation from the folks you see on the slide. And as I point out later, we really leverage that executive leadership team to establish a vision for the regional housing strategy, as well as working with several working groups, both a community leaders working group and a staff working group that's representative from staff from across the 3 jurisdictions, to test and vet some of the conditions we're seeing on the ground, as well as through the data analysis, as well as some of the policies and strategies that we've been talking about. So in our first meeting with the executive leadership team, we established a formal vision for this planning process, and I think that was a great start to one, kind of bring an understanding of what this planning effort is trying to accomplish in the region, as well as build some buy-in and support for what each jurisdiction is going to help throughout this process to achieve. And so this is the vision statement that the executive leadership team developed, as well as some core principles, so that as we begin to prioritize the policies and strategy recommendations, that we're weighing them against these core principles so that we're staying true to the vision and true to the planning process. One of the things we also talked about with the planning structure is what are the strengths, opportunities, weaknesses, and threats. And so through this planning process, we want to make sure that we're leveraging the strengths and the opportunities and addressing some of those weaknesses and threats related to affordable housing in the region. And so, again, building capacity, expanding that toolbox to allow and enable the region to address the affordable housing challenges that may come over the next 10 years. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ann Jordan, who will walk us through why we're approaching this on a regional level.
Good evening, everyone. So as Chris said, I'm going to dig in here a little bit about why we are approaching this regionally. It's really exciting to see all 3 jurisdictions come to the table and supported by community members from across the region. I think up first, we know that while affordable housing is serving specific income ranges, it also is a problem, an issue that affects across, anyone can have challenges with affordability, and it affects the broader community beyond that. We know that communities with more stable, quality, affordable housing, they have more purchasing power and tax revenues, that creates new job opportunities, it can improve educational and health outcomes for the whole community, and in general, strengthens and stabilizes neighborhoods. But we do know that there's a big affordable housing shortage in the region right now. A large driver in this has been the change in incomes versus home values over this long range from 2000 to 2016. Right there, you see that inflation-adjusted terms, that median income has decreased by about 14%, while home values have risen by almost as much. And we know that that hasn't even been updated with some of the most recent things. And so we know that that problem is continuing. We've seen a shortage of units for low-income households, particularly those earning 50% AMI and below. And so that shortage is actually about 12,000 for that 50% and below. And we know that's likely to increase given current population projections, constraints on new development, and expiring affordability. So here's just a quick visual. So we see that when you're just looking across the total number of units that are currently priced for low-income households, so broken down by 80% and below, 50% and below, 30% and below, you see that gap start to emerge for extremely and very low-income households when compared to the total number of renters at those income levels. And then when you account for availability of those units, so are they vacant or not occupied by a higher income household, you see that shortage grows to almost that 12,000 number, and then you see even it's extending to that 80% AMI and below too. And then back to the reason why it's so important to be addressing this at that regional scale. When you control for the different sizes of the jurisdictions, you see that that gap is playing out pretty similarly across Washoe County, Reno, and Sparks, as evidenced by this graph here, looking at the number of affordable and available units per 100 households at each of those income levels again. And overall, we know that the housing markets are not confined by regional boundaries. The housing market itself is regional. The changes that are happening in Reno affect the housing market in Sparks as they do in broader Washoe County. Housing availability and affordability, land, resources, the different policy tools in place, the development environment, the funding resources, all of these are regional issues. So it's so important that the region is tackling this together. So to dig in a little bit on some of the regional trends that we've been seeing, as well as some of the new or expanded tools the region could adopt, and that some of the working groups have been talking about, we've prepared some summaries here. And so the first is getting back at that shortage of affordable rental housing. So we already talked about that a little bit, but in terms of the tools that have been discussed, we're looking at a regional housing trust fund, which could be a flexible, dedicated source of funding that the region gets to decide, what projects, what types of activities it wants to be seeing, what criteria it wants to be holding those projects to. Also talking about inclusionary zoning, and when we say that, we're talking about a truly flexible tool that is tailored to specific market conditions throughout the region to really capitalize on all this great growth and build stronger, more mixed income communities. Then we also talked about public land disposition. We heard that land costs are so high that that's a really valuable thing that could be done to help offer more affordable housing by providing that in exchange at a discount or no cost. Then we also have talked about limited housing types in the region, which are also contributing to issues with housing affordability. So I think it was pretty stark when we look at just the types of households that we're seeing more of, 1 or 2 person households, relative to the total number of units that are available offering 3 bedrooms or less. You see 64% of households there are 1 or 2 persons, but only 40% of housing units are 3 bedrooms or less. So a lot of people are likely in a position where they may have to be paying a lot more for a much more house than they actually want. So thinking about ways to kind of right-size the different products that are being offered, thinking about some more diverse uses of land, including infill development, to get at some of the smaller sites that may be available, back to kind of that value of land that we talked about with the public land disposition. Also accessory dwelling units, which can not only offer affordable rentals to very low-income households because they're cheaper to develop, but can also be a source of income for cost-burdened homeowners. Then we also looked back at the challenges with housing costs. And a lot of these are very interrelated. And so we talked about how a lot of Washoe County residents are paying 30% of their income or even 50% of their income or more on housing costs. And some ways that can combat that are really around a community land trust, which we know the city of Reno is already exploring. So thinking about how that could be adopted on a regional scale to really leverage that work. Also, employer-assisted housing, so really engaging some of the private sector and offering down payment assistance or closing cost assistance is some models that other communities have adopted. Also talking about property-assessed clean energy financing. So thinking about how in preservation or rehabilitation of existing housing, you can lower costs not only for the property owner, but also utility costs for the tenants. Then we've heard a lot about housing quality concerns. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about just making housing that's surely livable and safe. And we see that the concentration of households experiencing housing problems is really at that lower end, so really compounding the challenges with housing costs. So thinking through ways to build in more strategic code enforcement. So right now we've heard that it's very much built around, coming at the kind of once the issue has already risen up. And so instead thinking about a more proactive approach for incentives for property owners to maintain their properties, as well as tenant protection so that tenants know their rights and are empowered to make sure that they have adequate, affordable living situations. And then we've also talked about expiring affordability and displacement concerns. We know that there are a lot of tax credit properties throughout the region that are coming upon the period at which they could exit their qualified contract for affordability. And while the housing market is heating up, there's a lot of opportunity there for them to sell those properties and convert them to market rate. So thinking about not only how to produce new units and new types of units, but also how to make sure your existing affordable housing stock stays affordable and avoids displacement of residents, particularly those that are vulnerable. So one of the ways that we've been talking about that is just inventorying all those properties. We've heard that a lot of the data on where those subsidized properties are right now is being held by a lot of different parties. So pulling that into one centralized place so that people can stay on top of when those affordability periods are ending. And so it can empower nonprofit partners who may be interested in entering into that contract to preserve affordability, so they're ready to go and they have the adequate information to act upon that. We've also talked about a preservation overlay zone, which would leverage the zoning code to identify target areas where maybe housing has traditionally been affordable but is experiencing market pressures. And so thinking through if that's a place to target incentives for developers to either redevelop and include affordable units when they are replacing existing affordable units, or if it's even just a notice period that would enable right of first refusal, which is the other tool here, so that a qualified organization like a nonprofit, even a tenants organization or a local government could step in when they're notified that a property is going to convert. And so with that, threw a lot of information at you, so now I'll turn it back to Chris to tell you what it all means.
Thanks, Ann. So yeah, what does this mean for the Truckee Meadows region? I think we've heard a lot about the data, the needs and the challenges that exist in the region, as well as some of the opportunities to increase that toolbox in the region. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at this 10-year planning process, or not planning process, but this 10-year plan as a way to both educate the community about the key terms, reduce some of the stigma about some of these terms that are out there, and also educate them on some of the tools that are being discussed right now in the planning structure, in those conversations with the working groups. And also make sure we're building a long-term policy framework. I think that's really important, that this is not something that you get right at the first crack. But I think if we increase and expand that toolbox, the region will be able to dip into that toolbox and pull out the most effective tool over a period of time to address to those changing market conditions. And I think that's something that's really important, really valuable. We also want to make sure that we're advocating for necessary changes to local and state law. We know that there's conversations happening both regionally, locally, as well as at the state that are going to impact the Truckee Meadows region. And we want to make sure we're advocating for the best outcome for the Truckee Meadows region related to affordable housing during those discussions. As I mentioned earlier, I think a critical piece of this planning effort, as well as that will be identified in the plan, is the alignment of strategies, policies, and resources. I think that's absolutely critical. As Ann mentioned, we're looking at both production of affordable housing as well as preservation of the existing affordable housing stock, both currently subsidized as well as some of the naturally occurring affordable housing stock. And I think that having a balance and a dual approach of preservation and production, both for rental and home ownership, I think is something that we want to achieve through this planning process as well as aligning those strategies with the appropriate policies and funding resources to incentivize as well as promote development. As we mentioned earlier, I think a hallmark of this effort, as indicated in the vision statement that was prepared by the executive leadership team, is building access to opportunity through housing investment decisions. We've talked about how the types of residents that are in need of affordable housing, that are experiencing affordable housing challenges, it's the workforce that exists in the region today. And by targeting and having more tailored housing strategies and investment decisions, we're able to effectuate better outcomes for those households, whether it's putting them in access to near transit, near job centers, better schools. But also Ann mentioned how this really impacts the region as a whole and what affordable housing can lead to from an economic perspective, from a regional coordination perspective, and better outcomes for the communities at large. And so this is something we're excited about and exploring and continue to explore with the planning structure, and also integrating into the plan itself. And I think when we get to phase 2 and developing that strategy roadmap, you'll begin to see how these things align and how we can better coordinate and align the resources across the region and the policy tools that we'll be developing through this process to implement those strategies. So in terms of next steps, we have a very important trip coming up in June. We'll be coming back to present the draft community profile, which will outline a lot of what we just summarized today in a lot more detail, but also begin to kind of illustrate case studies where some of the tools that we're suggesting and recommending, at least at this point in time, how those tools have benefited other communities, and so that there's real examples there of how these tools can be implemented on a regional scale. And then we'll come back and present to the community profile, to the TMRPC, as well as the TMRPGB, and begin work on phase 2 shortly after that. posted a community survey at the website you see here, tmaffordablehousing.metroquest.com. Received some good feedback to date, but we know that we want to continue to put this out there. So we ask for your support in getting the message out there to your stakeholders and constituency to please take that survey and provide their feedback. I think this is absolutely critical to informing a plan that is grounded in community feedback, and we look forward to that data and information coming in so we can integrate it into our process. So we know we threw a lot at you really quick. Happy to take any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you. Commissioners, anybody have any questions?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Chesney?
when you talk about subsidizing this affordable housing, where's that money come from?
It's a great question. It's something that we're discussing with the staff working group as well as the executive leadership team. I think there's a recognition that not all that money is going to come from public, local resources, general revenue. And I think that's why we mentioned that the need to create public-private partnerships to partner with philanthropic organizations, with private banks, as well as large organizations and companies to support this effort. The local jurisdictions have a role, certainly. And I think that's part of the reason why we're here, is to help kind of think through what strategies work from a funding perspective and how to not only leverage private resources, but attract private resources to the region.
Interesting.
Anyone else, any questions? Commissioner Gower.
Madam Chair, I just want to make a comment if I could.
Sure.
My comment is that I think this is one of the potentially the most challenging issues that we face as a region and in all of our communities of the commissions that we serve on. So I want to say that, I appreciate your team and Kim's staff leading up the effort to put this information together for us. So I'm really excited for the outcomes and to, work with the rest of the commission on this. I do want to caution, I guess, at this point that although this is a toolbox approach, I think that we need to be diligent at the outset that we have the right tools in the toolbox from the beginning. Because if we have tools in there that sort of in the long run may not give us the results that we want as a community, then we might paint ourselves into a corner. And there was one, I'm sort of wavering as to whether I want to say which one of those tools popped out at me, but there was one that did. So I just want to throw that out there that let's get the tools right from the beginning.
Appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Commissioner Weisky.
Thank you. If I can just add to that, I found it interesting that your presentation declared land prices to be key and critical. And my question, although it doesn't have to be answered now, but it's a question to be mulled over, is what about material costs? What about labor costs? Supply and demand? Because they're out of control. It's not just land costs.
Absolutely.
And although small lots are available and infill projects are available, we, as planning commissioners for each one of our entity, every meeting get told, no, higher density, we don't have enough parking, we don't have enough of this, we don't have enough of that. As comes down to parks, we had a discussion in the city of Reno a week ago about a pocket park that took place for, 15, 20 minutes during a hearing. And those are the things that go along with what everybody wants with infill projects that drives projects up. So it's not just the land cost. And I hope that all of the pie is being looked at before it's cut up and eaten. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback, Stephen.
Yes, thank you. This is an excellent start in terms of identifying where we have such disparity. We have, all of our entities have seen and have been brought before us or being proposed to be before us, huge housing developments that are single-family dwellings who, and the prices are astronomical. I mean, some of these new, I can't afford those. And I am not low income. And it's just, and when you talk about public land swap, the concern is transit for affordable families to be able to commute to places of work and places of employment. So we have this, we're already starting to see this chasm of this massive disparity in over-allocated in these $600,000 homes versus not being able to build affordable housing, and we're pricing people out of the region, more than half of our people out of the region. So in terms of, like Commissioner Gowan, I'm not ready to tip my hand as to which one tipped, jumped out me too, but it's working with these developers to, rather than see dollar signs, to see doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Chesney, do you have any comments? No. Okay. I do, and I realize that all the commissioners probably weren't able to, but I attended the map craft scenario. So exactly what Commissioner Weisky is saying and what Commissioner Chivilicek is saying is this is a program in order to help not only us as policymakers, but also developers to plug in parcel by parcel what we need to do, and can we build affordable there and things like that. So I know Ms. Robinson, we're possibly going to try to bring MapCraft back so that all of us as commissioners can see it, because from the presentation that I saw, it's going to cut a lot of the long-winded decisions that we have to make, because we're able to plug this stuff in and see, does it work? And then we'll know if it works before we approve these things. So I think that will benefit all of us.
Can I
Mr.
follow up?
Gower, you sure can.
So, Commissioner Vanderwell, with what you said, maybe a question for Kim is, so we have this information for proposed developments. Where does that come in the process? Because at regional planning, sitting here tonight, we had to make a decision on a project in Sparks or a planning proposal in Sparks that's pretty far along in the process. Can we get this information out sooner in the process? Or is it already?
I'm going to try and answer your question. I want to be clear what we mean by this information.
So, if I'm understanding what Chairman Vanderwell was talking about, is information on essentially the cumulative or regional impacts of individual development decisions on affordability. That's not a regional decision at the outset. It's a jurisdiction by jurisdiction question.
Yep.
So is that information going to be available at that stage when the jurisdictions have to make the decision?
And I think that's Madam Chair, I think that's a great question. MapCraft does a couple of things, I think, incredibly well. The first thing that it does is, say, for instance, the tools that were identified in the toolbox, and I'm guessing I can guess which ones we might have concerns about, but the tools in that toolbox, or the potential tools, what we saw yesterday was that this is a model. They're doing this in Austin, Texas right now. This is a model that says, okay, policies don't necessarily work very well when they're blanket policies. When we talk about real estate, we talk about various submarket areas, and we talk about, we have the best of intentions of creating policies, but we don't always necessarily know what some of those unintended consequences might be. What they're using MapCraft for in the city of Austin is to actually say, okay, I'm going to take an example as attached dwelling units. They've gone on a parcel by parcel basis, including local information around the cost of building, the cost of land, rents, market rates, all of those types of things, to be able to say, okay, where in this city could potentially accessory dwelling units actually work, right? There's a variety of other policies that they've done that with. What's interesting is, It's not just kind of one blanket neighborhood. It's like 3 parcels here and then, 5 over here and things like that. What we were talking about yesterday in relationship to affordable housing is how key we think it is to, rather than create the policy, go through the process of adopting policy, which is can be a pretty long public participation process, and then seeing how it works afterwards and maybe doing some evaluation later, saying actually what we should do is use this new technology and this new tool to test some of these things out ahead of time. So, kicking the tires on those tools, that toolbox, ahead of time to be able to figure out what those are. My expectation would be, is that information that's available for the jurisdictions? Absolutely, because what I would see is this would be a way for all of the jurisdictions to be able to take a look at, this policy geographically works in these different areas in my community. How am I going to respond to that with policies? How can I best implement that along the way? I'm hoping that that answers your question.
It does, and it's, it's getting to that more real-time, response of, how do our decisions relative to our policies, play out in the longer term? And it's getting away from what you were talking about of, let's, throw the dice and see what happens and then do some monitoring and see how it worked, even though we thought we were within our policy. So it's more of that real-time feedback, which I think, for something like affordable housing, for something like what's going on in the North Valleys, I mean, that's huge information.
Yes,
So.
it is.
Madam Chair, if I may?
Yes.
As I mentioned a little bit earlier in the meeting, we have the opportunity to have both Enterprise and Echo Northwest in town June 13th. I know that we have a Planning Commission meeting scheduled for June 6th. We have one agenda item at that point in time on that agenda. I spoke with the chair about a workshop kind of over at our shop that would actually allow us to dig into some of these pieces more. And I think bringing Mapcraft to that conversation would actually be really useful. What I can say is that your mind gets kind of blown when you see what the possibilities are. And some of the other things that it can do is take into account, this is an example from the city of Seattle, it takes into account, okay, so how much is it going to cost to build a certain building type, let's say a 4/1, and what does it take to build that, and then how much money does a builder or developer have left over to be able to purchase land, right? And so within that geographic, those submarkets, those geographies, you can take a look at it and say, well, here, $900 a square foot is still left to purchase land. Out here, you may actually have to provide a subsidy of $623 per square foot to have that type of residence built or that type of units built. And I think that's another piece that Mapcraft can do for us, which is some grounding in the market forces that exist here, and also would help all of us to, I think, understand some of those forces better. And I mean that from staff's perspective. I think it would be great kind of for the planning commissions, for the governing board. I think that's the other really useful piece that Mapcraft could bring to us.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. If I may, because I wasn't able to participate in the workshop, I've been doing 10,000 other things. When you started putting this together, I presume that you did take a historical look at what has happened in the region. I mean, the recession aside, we had, we had TODs, which were supposed to be affordable housing. Then they're now converted to warehousing, and which has created a need for workforce housing, but there's no place for that. And it's unbelievable how, that took place, that when we had that set aside for affordable housing, and then now, and we've created a bigger monster, I think. So that historical perspective, I think, is very, for all of the entities and all of the jurisdictions.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you,
All right,
Chris.
thank you.
Okay, next we'll move on to members and director reports.
Madam Chair, I just had the one item that I mentioned previously, which is the addition of a June 13th workshop. Per your request, I will send out an appointment to the planning commissioners on that.
So for clarification, we have the 6th and the 13th.
Correct.
Because I have those both on my calendar, so I don't.
Terrific, thank you. Is that it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Legal counsel report? Okay, thank you. Public comment, do we have any requests to speak? Okay, thank you. Written correspondence?
None.
Okay, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Okay,